This trimmer is very underwhelming. In fact, it's so underwhelming that I don't even remember how I got it. And don't worry, I didn't pay for this one. I'm a bit odd and who isn't, but I'm not that desperate. And as far as we know, this trimmer will start and run, but only after putting fuel into the carb. Now, I've fixed trimmers like this one before, but hopefully there's nothing else wrong with it. And that's because this machine is not worth that much, so if we have to replace one part, it could blow the budget. In today's video, we're going to be looking at this very inexpensive Bolens string trimmer. And the problem is that we don't know anything about it, but more than likely, it's not going to start. Now, if you're in this sort of situation, I would try to replace the old fuel and see if that helps out. But if you know the fuel is good and it still won't start, then the rest of the video could possibly help you out. Now, I'm going to try and repair this string trimmer, but yours might be different, so this might not work on yours. So if things are not working out for you, like in the video, please ask about it, and I'll be glad to answer your questions. The first thing that I'm going to do is take a look around the machine and make sure there's nothing wrong with it. After that, I'm going to document all the stickers I can find, just in case we need to buy new parts, which I sure hope we won't have to. I'm not sure how much I can sell this one for, but I know there's not a lot of meat left on the bones on this one. Now luckily, it's in pretty good condition, except for the obvious, which is of course the broken or chewed up pull handle. This is going to be our first expense, which depending upon where you get it from, could be as much as $8 or as low as $1. Now if you just got your machine and you've never heard it run before, I would try a test run just like I'm going to do here. And only after hearing it run would I then attempt to put fuel into it and then try to start it. But if yours does not start, well, your job just got a bit tougher then. Fortunately, it started and ran, but if yours does not start, you'll have to check for spark and compression from the engine. Now, since this one did start and run and ran for quite a long time, I think I'm going to put some fuel into the tank, purge the air from the system, and then try starting it. But this is when things turn bad. So as you can tell, the purge bulb is not returning back to its relaxed state, which means there could be a problem with the carb or even the fuel lines. However, even with the lines disconnected, the bulb is still not returning to shape, so the carb must be the problem. So here's the issue. To save time and some money, the best option would be to just replace the carb. But because this machine is worth very little, buying even a cheap replacement carb will severely cut into the profits, and that's if we sell it. And so far, we've got the pull handle to replace, and with the way the fuel lines look, they'll need to be replaced too. Now, if you buy your fuel lines by the foot, it'll be expensive, but if you buy them in larger quantities, it'll make it a lot cheaper. Now, fortunately for us, because the fuel filter is in great condition, we'll be able to reuse it. Now, you can clean these, and I base that on how much corrosion was on the metal part of the filter. However, if there's too much corrosion, I just replace it. So when installing the fuel lines, you can choose which opening is for the filter and the return. You don't have to keep it the way that it was. The first line that I'm installing is for the filter, and you'll need to pull out several inches of the line to be able to install the filter. Also, make sure to push the fuel line all the way against the filter element. If you don't, the filter could move around and allow some of the fuel to get past the filter, which could cause a clog in the carb. Also, when placing the filter in the tank, make sure it's in a good location to pick up as much fuel as possible. On this one, I'm placing it far away from the opening, that way it won't have a problem picking up fuel on its side while edging. Of course, you're welcome to locate your fuel filter in the tank wherever you want it to be, but that's just my recommendation. The last line to be installed is the fuel return line, and for this one, I will not be installing the plastic splice that the factory used. And instead, I like to leave at least an inch of line in the tank to keep it from coming loose. Next, I want to take off the plate that's covering the metering diaphragm so we can inspect its condition. Now, it's supposed to be extremely flexible like a cotton t-shirt, but this one is nowhere near that condition. And instead, it's as petrified as a dried out leaf, so it's not going to be able to do its job of controlling fuel flow through the carb. Now these are not cheap, at least when compared to a new aftermarket carb. However, I buy these in bulk, so luckily these are not expensive to replace. The strange part is that even with the carb open, the bulb is not wanting to return back to shape. That means the problem has to be with the pumping side of the carb, most likely some sort of blockage. And it's pretty obvious that it is some sort of blockage because as soon as I break the seal on the bulb, it returns back to shape. And after taking off the plate and exposing the body of the carb, it is pretty dirty in there, but that was not the source of the problem. So take a look at the pumping diaphragm. Notice anything wrong with it? I know it's tough to tell, and it took me a minute to realize it too. It appears the diaphragm was incorrectly installed and it's out of position, causing our problem. Basically, one of the vital openings in the body of the carb has been covered up, and that's the reason why the bulb is acting the way that it is. Now you might be thinking, why not just reposition the diaphragm then? But the problem with that is that the diaphragm is now damaged and doing that may not help. I've never seen a situation like this before, and it's pretty obvious that this was done after it was bought, meaning this was not like this from the factory. Someone must have tried to service the carb but didn't put it back together with extra care. So what's the plan then? Well, I guess we need to find out if this carb will even work, so I might as well use one of my saved metering diaphragms, put the carb back together, and see what happens. Now to save time, I'm not going to show you the reassembly process because nothing exciting happened. But the next part is extremely important, so you might want to pay close attention. Now because we're not sure if this carb will even work, we're going to test it ahead of time. And to do that, I'm going to connect a fuel line with a filter on it to the carb and drop the filter into some gasoline. Now on this carb, the filter line is supposed to connect to the lower brass port, then we'll press on the bulb and see if any fuel is pulled up into the line. And unfortunately, as you can see, the fuel is struggling to move up the line, only making it about an inch or so. What that means is that this carb is not going to work, and even though it might seem I'm giving up too soon, I personally think that the pumping diaphragm is just too badly damaged to be reused. But luckily for us, I happen to have a spare carb I took off a different project which will save us not only some time, but some money as well. Now I don't recall what happened to the other project, and I'm not even sure if this carb is in working condition, but it's worth a shot. I guess I could just swap the good diaphragm from the other one and put it into ours, but to make it easy, I'm just going to install it. The reason why is pretty simple, I'm just choosing to, and if it comes back to bite me, well, I'll take responsibility for it. In all honesty, the more time I put into this project, the less it's worth selling, and that's because I'll never get the money back for my time. Also, as a side note, make sure that the O-ring is still on the plastic insulator, otherwise there's going to be an air leak and it's going to cause all sorts of starting and even running problems. I just realized that I did not install the paper gasket between the carb and the air filter base. However, it's not going to affect how the engine runs, but it could make the choke not work as well as it should. So later on, I'll have to remember to install a paper gasket there, but let's see how it does without it. So when pressing on the bulb, fuel should come up the filter line, enter the carb, fill the bulb, and then leave through the return line and go back to the tank. And after several presses, it's sort of working, and even though it could work better, I think it's good enough for a test start. Well, I had to stop the test right there because I forgot there's no string in the trimmer head, which we'll need if we're going to tune the carb. But at least we know that it starts and runs, so after loading the string, we'll try that again. Now, if you find it difficult to load your string, there should be some sort of directions on the spool. I know that I had a tough time when I first started doing this years ago, but now I just read the printed instructions on it. Now personally, if I had to pick a trimmer head, I pick the type where you load 2 pieces of string into the head. The reason why is because it makes it a whole lot easier, and yes, even though I do waste about half the line, I'm okay with the trade-off. Now you would think that I would prefer this type of trimmer head instead because it's a better use of my money, but in this case, easy wins over cost. So I forgot to mention why it's so important to have string loaded in the trimmer head, and that's because it's going to put a load on the engine during our tuning process. Now on this particular carb, we're going to need a special tool to make our adjustments, but yours might be a different type. The screws are on top of the carb, and the one closer to the engine is the L screw. It's meant to adjust fuel at low engine speeds and for quick throttle squeezes. That means the one closer to the airbox is the H screw, and it's meant to adjust fuel while the engine is at full speed, or basically while the trigger is fully squeezed. And this is the Phillips head screw that you can turn to adjust the engine's idle speed. So after some very small adjustments, it's now running a whole lot better, although I'm sure it would have been somewhat usable without the adjustments, but it certainly would have been a whole lot more frustrating to use. So besides reusing an old carb, reloading some string, and replacing some fuel lines, we still need to replace the pull handle. So technically this repair won't cost more than a couple of bucks. But what would have happened if we didn't have that spare carb? Well, the repair would have been just a bit more expensive then. And if we did have to buy a $10 carb, well, that would have killed almost any profit from the sale of this very cheap trimmer. So my question is, if this was your project, how much would have been too much to invest in it to get it running again? Or would you have simply not even bothered to begin with? Thank you for watching. I really do appreciate your time here. Please feel free to ask me any questions about this project or about your own projects, and I hope to see you in the next video.